Okay, it's day 23, and it's Exodus 33 through 36. I always have to think about it. You think I would just like write it down here in front of me so I could just spit it out. But I'm not that smart, so pause this video. You go read Exodus 33, 36 for yourself and come on back, see if I'm crazy or not. All right. So 33 through 36. I guess maybe you noticed by now that God throws things at people sometimes that he doesn't necessarily, fully intend, but for their evaluation, for their test. Like Isaac and Abraham. Isaac, take your son, your only son, and go offer him, right? And of course we know that it was an evaluation for Abraham, and it was for Abraham, not God. And yeah, I think he did the same thing here with Moses, and God's entitled to do that. He's God, and he is the one that is molding and shaping and testing and trying and training and bringing us along. And it says that he uses all things for good, for our good. And as a parent, just as we're entitled to evaluate, to test, to train our children, well, he's entitled to do the same unto us. But did you see what he did with Moses? And now he suggested to them that I'll blot them out. I'll raise up a new nation out of you. And Moses interceded for them. And then again in 33, he tells Moses in this way. He said, I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, the Hittite, Perizzite, the Hivite, Jebusite, the Kilabite, the Terabyte, the Megabite. And verse 3, and I'll go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, and I will not go up in your midst, because you are an obstinate people, lest I destroy you on the way. You're a bunch of knuckleheads, in other words. That's what he's saying. He's saying, I'll send a messenger with you, but I'm not going with you. And look at the character of Moses. I think this is so fascinating in 33 and all these things about Moses. We go a little bit further on and look in 33 verse 14. Look at the determination of Moses. And he said, my presence shall go with you, and I will give you rest. In verse 15, then he said to him, Moses, said to God, if your presence does not go with us, do not lead us up from here. In other words, Moses had set his heart on the presence of the Lord. And if the presence of the Lord is not in it, it's not worth it. It's no good. I remember the Apostle Peter when Jesus asked him, are you going to, to leave also and depart from me? And Peter asked him, to whom shall we go, Lord? You have the words of life. And Peter had hit a point in his life, although he didn't have the spiritual maturity to back it up fully, but he had the full intent, the desire in his heart to stick with Christ, and there was no option. There was no plan B. There was no other, thing. And this is what Moses had come around to. Listen, God, if you're not personally going to go, then let's not do it. Let's not go. And aren't you amazed at the complexity of God's work? At the time when he's leading 1 million+ people, a whole nation, through all this, and there's war going on, and there's needs for supplies and sustenance going on, that at the same time, he's still working in the individual lives, in the intricacies of Joshua's life, of Miriam's life, of Moses' life, of Jethro's life. And, especially we get the highlights here from Moses, that he is actually working specifically in Moses, got something going on there while he's got something going on with the whole nation, not to mention, who knows how many other people at the same time, the complexity of what God has going on. And Moses' determination had been, he came to the point that, listen, if your presence not going, I don't want to go. Don't lead us up from here. Let's not go. But God said, hey, listen, I'm going to speak to you. I'm going to tell you something. You know, and then look at Moses' preparation. Chapter 34, verse 1. Now the Lord said to Moses, cut out 2 tablets of stone like the former ones, and I'll write on the tablets the words that were on the former tablets, which you shattered. So be ready in the morning, and come up in the morning. You know, when God says, I want to speak to you, I want to tell you something, that Moses got busy, right? And, you know, working to prepare. That's what we're doing. We're, you know, making preparation. We're making an effort. You know, we're opening his word and reading it. And then also, notice something else that Moses had in his life. He had isolation with God. You know, in verse 3, God told him, and no man is to come up with you. He had that isolation out in the desert, you know, for a good while. He really had an isolation in his ministry very much, that there was time in Moses' life that was set aside, just him and God. There needs to be that time for us too. You know, leave your friends at home, leave the TV off, leave the radio off, leave the commentary off, shut my video off. You pick up the Bible for yourself. You pray for yourself, and nobody but you and God, and you're not going to split your attention to God with somebody else. Moses had isolation. Moses had expectation. He went, he cut those tablets out. He expected, you know, I pick up this Bible, I open it, I realize that God preserved it for thousands of years, and many people died to preserve it. I have an expectation that he's going to speak to me out of it. And so I make the effort. I open it up. Moses had an expectation from God. Not only that, Moses had an adoration for God. Down in verse 8, it says, well, look at verse 7. You know, look at the description of God. Or verse 6, you know, that he is compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness and truth. He keeps loving kindness for thousands and forgives iniquity, transgression, and sin. You know, the character of God. And verse 8, and Moses made haste to bow low toward the earth and worship, because once you get to know who God is, you realize that he is something to be worshipped. You know, that he really is someone to be adored and to be worshipped. And then he has an intercession, Moses does. And he starts off in verse 9, and he says, now if I have found favor in your sight, O Lord, I pray, even though the people are so obstinate, and do thou pardon our iniquity. Moses just switched from I to our, I to we. Our iniquity and our sin, and take us as thine own possession. That Moses had, you know, latched on to these people, you know, and you'd say, well, you know, they're a bunch of knucklehead sinners, but Moses had a Christ-like character, that he was becoming more like God. He was becoming more like Christ, and that he had, you know, an interceding love for these people. And that's exactly what Christ had for us. And while we were sinners, he died for us. And God made him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf, that we might be made the righteousness of God. And how he intercedes for us. And so, you know, you think about all those things. I see in verse 11 the observation that Moses was to have. He said, be sure to observe all I'm commanding you this day. Now listen, he was supposed to observe God's directions, and he was also supposed to observe, you know, man's depravity. You know, verse 11, observe all I'm commanding you this day. Verse 12, but watch yourself. You know, observe God's commandments. Observe your own depravity. You know, your own likelihood to do the things that we do. If any man think he stand, let him take heed lest he fall. Now listen, last thing, and I got to finish this. It's 45 seconds. Verse 29. You know, and it came about when Moses was coming down from Mount Sinai, and 2 tablets of the testimony were in Moses' hand, and he was coming down from the mountain, that Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone, because he was speaking with him. And this was a problem. This was something that came in, and he were all that. Listen, in all this stuff, Moses had one other thing. He had a transformation. Have you caught on to what happened to Moses in the last 30 chapters? Moses' face wasn't shining in chapter 3 when he was making 5 reasons why he should not be the one to go. He's like, God, this is a great plan you have. You go do it with somebody else. I'm out. That's not the Moses anymore. There's a different Moses today. He's like, God, I want to be in your plan and nothing but your plan. And he is really a transformed man at this point. Even we can see in his interactions with Israel and his interactions with God. And Moses had a transformation, and God made that man to shine. And he can make you to shine as well. And I don't know, Moses was 80 when he had that first conversation with God. And it wasn't too late for God to do something with him. It's not too late for God to do something with you. And he can make you shine. Maybe you think you're some old burned out, past, too late, Moses was old and he had been around and he had lived through a lot of life. He had lived through a lot of life, not really shining for the Lord. But listen, when he came to that kind of character, when he really gave himself to follow God faithfully, God really made him to shine and really transformed him, continued transforming him. Okay, so that's too long. If you're ready, if you watched it all, that's your fault, not mine. But, I hope it's a blessing to you. I hope the word is a blessing to you. I hope y'all stick with it, and we'll make it all the way through this thing this year. So there we go. That's day 23. We'll see you tomorrow for day 24.